Hi everyone, this is Dr. Joanne Cacciatore with a long overdue bits and pieces. I received an email this morning. Someone asked me if I would do a bits and pieces about the physiological effects of emotional avoidance in bereavement. And I'm happy to do that. And one of the reasons I'm so happy to do that is because there's so much talk right now about the physiological effects of grief generally. And for sure, grief affects our physical body. I've talked about that a lot in prior bits and pieces and in my writing. But one of the things that we don't often talk about is that bereavement itself, avoiding our emotions in bereavement itself, actually incites just as much, if not more, in terms of adverse physiological health for people who are grieving. In other words, being in grief costs us something emotionally, mentally, socially, existentially, and spiritually, but also physiologically. And also, very important to this is the avoidance of grief incites a host of physiological problems. So avoidance itself, and this is not just in bereavement, but this is emotional avoidance broadly speaking, incites pro-inflammatory markers in the body. It depresses our immune system. It can impact our cardiovascular risk. And I'm going to provide a narrative in the YouTube with some citations around that. So while we often talk about the effects of grief on the body, I think we also need to talk about the effects of avoiding grief on the body, which is something that often gets missed. Now, I want to take it a step further and say that grieving people need support, not surveillance. The problem, as I see it, in terms of the avoidance of grief, is that society avoids not just grief, but grievers. And so grievers are constantly being sent these implicit and explicit messages. Don't feel your grief, don't feel your grief, don't feel your grief. So how are grieving people supposed to not avoid when they exist in a society that is in general avoiding them and their grief? And so I often look at things in their context. I'm a big context person. So if grieving people are supposed to not avoid their grief, how do they do so in a society that's constantly sending them messages to avoid their grief? What I would say is we need to change society. So I'm going to, again, have a little narrative. You're welcome to read that narrative. And I'm going to encourage people to start not just talking about the physiological health effects of grief, but the physiological health effects of avoiding grief. And that in part, at least significant part from my work, society is responsible for that. This is Dr. Joanne Cacciatore with Bits and Pieces.